What if the biggest risk to your brain isn't genetics, but the chemicals you're exposed to every single day? In this episode, Dr. Ray Dorsey uncovers the pesticides and toxins hidden in our water, our food, and even our homes, and how they may be fueling a surge in Parkinson's disease.
Hello and welcome to the Open Your Eyes podcast. I'm Dr. Kerry Gelb, the host of the documentary Open Your Eyes. If you're new here and you like our interviews, press like, subscribe, share, and hit the bell to get notifications of great new interviews. Also, please leave comments. Great news, you can now watch our full-length documentary, Open Your Eyes, on Amazon Prime, Apple TV, iTunes, Google Play, and YouTube Movies and Shows. And also, please share your thoughts by emailing me at drkerrygelb@gmail.com. I want to talk about toxic chemicals. We're exposed to 700,000 different toxic chemicals a day. The average female is exposed to 168 different chemicals. The average male, 85 different chemicals. When we look at agricultural areas that have the highest Parkinson's disease, I think you might have mentioned Canada before, and the areas of Canada with the most environmental pesticides seem to have the most Parkinson's disease. If you could mention that again.
Yeah, so one of these pesticides are everywhere in the environment, as you indicated too. A study just came out, as reported in The Guardian, that showed 70% of pregnant women in Indiana had a weed killer in their urine. 70% of pregnant women in Indiana have a weed killer in their urine. In Canada, in the 1980s, we knew Dr. Barbeau and his colleagues showed that rates of the prevalence of Parkinson's disease had a near perfect correlation in rural areas of Canada to the amount of pesticides used. The more you use pesticides, the higher the greater proportion of people with Parkinson's disease. The lower you use pesticides, the lower proportion of people that had Parkinson's disease. Same study has been done in France by Dr. Alexis Elbaz and colleagues. The same study, I believe, has been done in Israel and other parts of the world. We have increasingly really good circumstantial and experimental evidence linking pesticides to Parkinson's disease. This is a terrible disease. We're using these weed killers not to prevent people from getting malaria, but to, for often relatively trivial indications. Many of these pesticides are 60 plus years old. None of us would fly in an airplane from the 1960s. Why are we using chemicals from the 1960s?
With more screen usage and indoor time, myopia, also known as nearsightedness, is increasing and getting worse in children. Now, certified eye doctors can prescribe MiSight One Day, the first and only FDA-approved soft contact lens to slow myopia progression in age-appropriate children. Visit CooperVision.com to find a Brilliant Futures certified eye doctor near you. People that work in vineyards have a greater risk of Parkinson's disease. Does that mean if you're not drinking organic wine, it could increase your risk? Have you ever thought of that? I mean,
yeah. So I'm gonna get the French wine industry after me in a second. So there's a magazine, Quai Chaussure. It's basically the Consumer Reports of France, and they did a study looking at levels of pesticides in French wines, and they found, I think they found detectable levels of pesticides in every single bottle of wine that they opened, even organic ones. Organic ones had lower levels of pesticides, sometimes in levels that were so small they couldn't be readily quantified, than in conventional wines. But vineyards from French wines have pesticides in them.
Crazy, right? So if we go through the chemicals, you talked a little bit about them, but I'm going to ask you about them a little bit again in kind of a sequential way. DDT was kind of one of the first ones, and that's the one with Rachel Carson. That was in our movie, Open Your Eyes. We talked about that, and you see them spraying it, and you make a great point that she wasn't so much against it. She wanted the pesticides to be used correctly. So, but DDT, I believe, is out. You can't use it anymore, but they still use it in Africa to prevent malaria. Isn't that interesting?
Yeah, so listen, there are good reasons to use pesticides. You have lice, you want pesticides. You don't want lice in your hair. What she was arguing against, and I extend that argument, is indiscriminate use of it. So after World War II, DDT got a hero's welcome. Use of DDT after World War II, using World War II to prevent malaria, its use increased 40 to 80 fold. There are pictures of pesticide trucks spraying DDT, and kids are following it behind it like it's an ice cream truck. DDT, and it belongs to a class of pesticides called organochlorines. These pesticides dissolve in fat. You could measure these pesticides in the fat of general populations and see them rising in the 40s, 50s, and 60s. Alongside that increase in levels of those pesticides, you can see increasing numbers of people affected with Parkinson's disease and dementia with Lewy body disease. So it's quite possible that many diseases were really just extraordinarily rare or didn't exist until we had widespread use of these nerve toxins that get into our body, that are measured in our fat. As you know, your brain, all the neurons in your brain, most of them are covered with myelin, which is a fatty substance. And you can find the residues of these pesticides, this class of pesticides, in the brains of people with Parkinson's disease. We also know we can find them in milk. You can find them in the milk of nursing mothers. You can find them in cow's milk from cows who have eaten grass or other vegetation sprayed with these pesticides. You can find it in their milk, and then we drink that milk, we consume that pesticide, and then it enters our bodies.
I think it's amazing that it dissolves in fat when 60% of our brain is fat.
Exactly. So it's like a really a concern. And as you know, unlike things that dissolve in water, which you can readily pee out, you can't excrete things that dissolve in fat. The only time you excrete things in fat is when women nurse.
So let's go to Agent Orange. I think one of the most interesting thing is where Agent Orange got its name from, being stored in these orange barrels. But talk to us about Agent Orange. 4 million Vietnam vets came into contact with Agent Orange. I've had patients that have been devastated from Agent Orange, just devastated. You know, I've been around long enough to see these Vietnam vets, and my goodness, how sick they are, and, you know, from head to toe. But if you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so in Vietnam, the United States had an interest in clearing the vegetation in North Vietnam so its fighters could identify the enemy in North Vietnam, which was really hard to do in thick vegetation. So they developed very toxic weed killers. Each of them were named based on the color of a stripe around these 55-gallon drums in which they were stored. There was Agent Purple, Agent Orange, and the like. And they had pesticides, weed killers, in them in different combinations and in different concentrations. And studies since that time have linked Agent Orange to a wide range of health effects, Parkinson's just being a very small sliver of that. Then Congressman Tom Daschle, later Senate Majority Leader in the 1980s, introduced and passed legislation that provided some compensation and health benefits to veterans who were exposed to Agent Orange during the Vietnam War. In addition to the veterans who were exposed to it, you know, there were obviously all the civilians and others who were exposed to it in those countries. Numerous reports from the National Academies of Medicine, National Academies of Sciences have asked for additional research to be done on Agent Orange. Much of that's never been done, or at least never been released to the public. It's worth mentioning, this is not theoretical. General Colin Powell, recently passed away. He passed away with Parkinson's disease and multiple myeloma, and he did 2 tours of duty during Vietnam. And in one, he was dumping Agent Purple, a more toxic, more concentrated form of Agent Orange, into Vietnam, likely inhaling or otherwise getting exposed to the chemical, which is linked obviously to both Parkinson's disease and to multiple myeloma, 2 conditions that he had prior to his death.
And now heptachlor, in Hawaii, so they would, with the tops of the pineapple.
So Dr. Gelb read my book. So all these, our book is not technical. It's written for the everyday person. They're all little stories, and then there's plenty of references to the science if you want to do a deeper dive. So heptachlor belongs to that same chemical class of pesticides like DDT, organochlorines that dissolve in fat, and it was banned in the United States. The Hawaii Pineapples Association sought to get an exemption to protect their cash crop, pineapples in Hawaii, So they let them use heptachlor to spray on pineapples. And it turned out that soon after the pineapples were harvested, they took the chop, the green leafy part at the top of a pineapple, and they fed it to cows. And they didn't wait enough time for the pesticide to degrade, and they fed it to the cows. The cows then concentrated this pesticide, which dissolves in fat, in their milk. That milk made it onto the stores in Hawaii. They found out that the milk in the stores in Hawaii had toxic levels of this pesticide, did a milk recall. Turned out Dr. Tanner and her colleagues were part of a research study completely separate, looking at the effects of aging in populations in Hawaii. And they found that people who drank high levels of milk in Hawaii had higher rates of Parkinson's disease. When they looked at the brains of those individuals after they died, they found that the areas of the brain with dopamine-producing nerve cells were damaged, and those dopamine-producing neurons were damaged. And they found the residue of heptachlor in the brains of people who were drinking high levels of milk in Hawaii. It's basically, they found the smoking gun right there in their brains.
And they were using the heptachlor because they didn't want the ants that were eating the pineapples.
Yes. So this is, again, like, not to prevent malaria, but to, kill ants. And, we don't, like I alluded to the fact that we don't drive cars from the 1960s in general, unless, for recreational purposes. We don't fly in airplanes from the 1960s. DDT was developed in the 1940s. We don't doubt the intellectual abilities of American chemists or American scientists. If we can come up with safer engineers can come up with safer cars and safer airplanes, American chemists and other chemists around the world can certainly come up with safer pesticides.
So those three, DDT, Agent Orange, and heptachlor, they're outlawed now in the United States?
In the United States, yes, those are not permitted. Agent Orange was essentially just used during Vietnam in toxic levels, although its constituents, the chemicals that made it up, I think are banned in the United States, but I think some of them are still used in other parts of the world. As you can imagine, one, I'm not a toxicologist. Two, just like, there's a whole cornucopia of medications to treat a wide range of conditions. There is a long list of pesticides that are used to kill all of them, and I'm not a pesticide expert.
Let's talk about some of them that are still available in the United States, that are still here, still allowed. You start off with Paraquat, that's been here since the 1950s.
Yeah, so Paraquat's a weed killer. So the United States had such great success in some people's minds about using weed killers in Vietnam. They started spraying Paraquat as part of the war on drugs on marijuana fields in Canada. And in people who've watched the movie The Big Lebowski, there's a reference to Paraquat, don't be such a quat, because they were the marijuana plant that was being grown in Mexico, making its way to Southern California, was being smoked with adverse health consequences. My understanding is that the United States was not content to spray it on marijuana fields in Canada, and Mexico did the same thing in Georgia. So the US government is spraying a toxic weed killer on civilians in Georgia who are growing marijuana plants. This pesticide, according to research conducted by Dr. Tanner, farmers who are exposed to this chemical have a 150% increased risk of research. Across the street from me, Dr. W. Corey Schlecht in the late 1990s did research linking this Paraquat to Parkinson's in laboratory animals, who developed both the pathological features of Parkinson's, loss of dopamine-producing nerve cells, and the clinical features, slowness of movement in animals. And it turns out that, according to research done by The Guardian and Carrie Gillum, that the chemical manufacturer knew about its risks from the 1960s, that they exposed both rabbits, rats, and mice, 3 different mammalian species, to Paraquat in the 1960s, all developed either clinical or pathological features of Parkinson's disease and covered up its risk, didn't withdraw the product from the market, didn't seek to introduce a safer alternative, instead doubled down on their blockbuster product under a campaign of freedom to sell. 3 countries with the highest rates of Parkinson's disease in the world, the United States, Canada, and Argentina, were all using, until very recently, all using Paraquat. The United States still does.
And I did a podcast with Kerry Gilliman, and she
Oh,
was in a film, and a great podcast. And she's full of knowledge and she's a journalist, fantastic. Something about Paraquat, it depletes NADPH and interrupts cell metabolism, and we need NADPH or NAD plus to make glutathione, which is the body's natural detoxifier. And I know, a friend of mine called me yesterday, and she's doing NAD plus infusions, for health purposes. So if you could comment about depleting NADPH.
yes. So I can't comment about the confusions, but it turns out paraquat, trichloroethylene, or that many of these chemical toxins that are linked to Parkinson's disease all inhibit the function of mitochondria. Paraquat, I believe, inhibits complex 1 of the respiratory train. If you go back to your biochemistry, like everyone's long since forgotten that painful thing, that there's a Krebs cycle, that in the presence of oxygen, you got a lot of energy produced. And if you don't have oxygen, you don't get very much energy produced for every glucose molecule that you consume. And so that these mitochondrial toxins damage the mitochondria, prevent adequate energy generation from occurring in these nerve cells, which have huge energy demands. Our brain is only 3% of our body weight, but consumes 20% of our energy reserves, or energy, 20% of our energy. So they're very, very dependent on mitochondrial function. So if you have toxins in our environment, pesticides and others that damage these energy producing parts of cells, you may be predisposing yourself to Parkinson's and related diseases.
And how about lowering the formation of glutathione?
So, glutathione's been used as a free radical scavenger, and you know more about this than I do, Dr. Gelb. People have looked at it for a wide range of conditions, and there are some indications for which glutathione has been shown to be beneficial, and has not been extensively studied to my knowledge in Parkinson's disease, and not been shown to be a benefit to my knowledge in Parkinson's.
And you mentioned TCE before. Let's expand a little bit on what TCE is used, and again, it's a solvent, and a solvent is a liquid that dissolves another substance. So we have grease, we want to dissolve it. Talk a little bit about that. And it's sweet. It smells sweet. So does that mean that people go out there because it smells good, they want to keep smelling like gasoline? I remember as a little kid, I used to love the smell of gasoline.
Yes. So yeah, there's a lot to unpack. So we told Paraquat was developed in the 1950s. It turns out that trichloroethylene was developed, I think, in 1864. So just to give a little perspective, that's when Abraham Lincoln was president. This chemical was first developed, and it's been used since the 1920s. So that's about a little bit after the time of the Wright brothers launching the first airplane, and Henry Ford with the Model T. And this chemical is still used in degreasing. It's been used to decaffeinate coffee in the 1970s. So if you drank decaffeinated coffee in the 1970s or earlier, you were likely consuming this. It was found in typewriter correction fluid. So people who were sniffing typewriter correction fluid were sniffing trichloroethylene. It was found in gun cleaners, carpet cleaners, and then widely used as degreasing. If many of your listeners, remember you sprayed like you had an engine and it was all filled with grease, and you spray something on it, the grease melted away. Meet trichloroethylene. And so this chemical in the 1970s, 2 pounds of trichloroethylene per American, 2 pounds per American of trichloroethylene. 10 million Americans worked with the chemical. It's estimated that 1 in 12 people in England, 1 in 12 workers in England worked with trichloroethylene. Printing, publishing, industrial production, refrigerants, list is long. And it's associated with a 500% risk of Parkinson's disease in humans. And mice, it reproduces the clinical and pathological features of Parkinson's disease. Like Paraquat, it damages the energy-producing parts of cells, the mitochondria. In Parkinson's disease, it was contaminated the water in Woburn, Massachusetts, living to the movie and book of Civil Action. Same thing happened in Toms River, New Jersey. Same thing happened in Camp Lejeune in North Carolina, where 1 million Marines, their dependents, and the civilians between 1953 and 1987 were exposed to toxic levels of this in their drinking water. The Marines knew about it in the latter years and did nothing. The Marines knew about it and did nothing. And because of that, people like Sergeant Jerry Insminger. His daughter developed leukemia while living on the Marine base with her father, and then died. And it led Jerry Insminger and his colleagues to launch a 26-year campaign to bring justice for the Marines who served at Camp Lejeune. So now people can get health benefits and financial benefits for the health consequences that they needlessly suffered while serving their country.
And so it also, like you mentioned, causes cancer, brain tumors. Same with Paraquat.
Yeah, so Paraquat, I don't know about tumors. It causes other respiratory diseases. Trichloroethylene is known to cause cancer. According to the EPA, it's carcinogenic by all routes of exposure, so you can work with it and come in skin contact. It rarely evaporates, so it's used in dry cleaning, and so you can breathe it in. And it contaminates up to 30% of groundwater in the United States, so you can consume it, and that's what the Marines at Camp Lejeune were doing it, and the civilians there. And its health consequences is it's been associated with neural tube defects, birth defects, congenital heart disease, infertility, wide range of autoimmune disorders. As you said, you see people with Agent Orange exposure, they're just not healthy. I visited Marines in Kentucky who served at Camp Lejeune, and I was expecting to go see Marines, and they're all like, a lot of them are just unhealthy people, like men with loss of skin discoloration, with alopecia, with autoimmune disorders, just things that shouldn't be happening. Breast cancer happened among male Marines, so much so that Marines at Camp Lejeune developed a swimsuit calendar, not of model women, but of men who developed breast cancer, who all showed off their mastectomy scars from getting breast cancer while serving at Camp Lejeune.
And Paraquat, cancer, lung disease, and autism also.
Yeah, I don't know about the cancer. I'd stay, but I'll defer to you on that.
Okay, and now I want to bring the next one belongs in the family of sarin gas that was used by the Nazis in World War II. The most widely used insecticide in our country, Chlorpyrifos.
So this thing is unbelievable. Unbelievable. EPA 2 or 3 years ago banned chlorpyrifos, which was widely used to kill insects, estimated to have cost 25 million kids, 17 million IQ points. So you mentioned intellectual disabilities, 25 million kids, 17 million IQ points. Sprayed on golf courses. So
wooden fences.
We talked about, DDT being sprayed to prevent malaria. This is being sprayed so you can have clean, weed-free putting greens. Sprayed on utility poles, sprayed on Washington State apples, sprayed on large numbers of fruit produce in the United States. This manufacturer evidently sued the EPA in court, and the court has told the EPA to revisit its decision to ban chlorpyrifos, which has also been linked to Parkinson's disease.
Yeah, they spray it on almonds, cotton, grapes, oranges. Causes lower birth weight. It's amazing that we're still using this.
Yeah, and you should there was a great Wall Street Journal article, hardly the bastion of liberalism, front page Wall Street Journal article highlighting that rates of cancer among people under 50 in the United States is increasing. So rates of cancer among people under the age of 50 is increasing. This increase is happening at the same time smoking is decreasing in the United States. So probably the biggest cause of cancer, certainly of lung cancer, is smoking, and you're seeing decreasing rates of smoking and increasing rates of cancer in the United States among young adults. And this is happening before people are being screened. So this, colon cancer mammograms are all generally indicated for people 50 or older. So it can't be just increased diagnosis. It can't be genetics, right? This is happening in too short of a time period. You need to ask yourself what's causing increasing rates of cancer in people under 50. And I think the answer is that there are environmental toxins that are being widely used in our environment. I forgot what the number you told us what, 70,000? Is that what you said? 70,000?
Yeah, 700,000.
700,000, sorry. 700,000, we should be very, very, very mindful and very, very concerned about what these chemicals are doing to our health. Life expectancy in the United States today is less than it was when I was in medical school in 1999. Life expectancy in 25 years after I finished medical school is lower than it was when I graduated medical school, and we're spending 50% more on healthcare than we did when I graduated medical school. Clearly, there are things that we're doing to our environment that are leading us to live shorter, sicker lives, and I think all of this is preventable. A large portion of this is preventable.
I mean, Columbia Presbyterian did a study, and they said that over 95% of cancers is from food and environmental toxins. I mean, so, this goes exactly to what you're saying. And I want to talk about the cleanup program, the Superfund sites in the Valley. If you could talk a little bit about that, Fairchild Semiconductor and Intel, everybody's favorite.
So, Andy Grove, the former CEO of Intel, died with prostate cancer and with Parkinson's disease. And I mentioned this chemical trichloroethylene causes cancer, prostate cancer among the cancers linked to it, and associated with the 500% increased risk of Parkinson's disease. There are these Superfund sites throughout the United States, over 2,000 of them. Half are contaminated with this chemical, 15 alone on a 7-mile stretch of the 101 freeway in Silicon Valley. 15 Superfund sites along a 7-mile stretch in one of the wealthiest parts of the United States and one of the wealthiest parts of the country that are contaminated with this chemical, including a former Intel facility, including a former Fairchild Semiconductor facility that now serves as a location for Google, but it was contaminated by likely Fairchild Semiconductor and Intel. And these chemicals are everywhere. And they not only contaminate the groundwater, but they can evaporate. So TC is used in dry cleaning, and its chemical used to be used in dry cleaning, and its cousin perchloroethylene still used in dry cleaning, and it rarely evaporates. So if it's in the groundwater, which is 15 to 50 feet below the surface, depending on where you live, this chemical, like radon, can evaporate and enter your home, your kid's school, or your workplace undetected. We found in Rochester, New York, that attorneys working in an office tower right next to a former contaminated dry cleaning site, of the 79 law partners that we examined, 4 had Parkinson's disease and 15 had a cancer related to trichloroethylene. We looked at a comparison group, only 1 had Parkinson's and only 4 had a cancer related to this chemical. So this is found in Silicon Valley. It's found at countless military bases, especially Air Force bases, because it was widely used to clean jet engines. So if you were a mechanic at a military base, if you flew in fighter jets, you were likely exposed to trichloroethylene. Senator Johnny Isakson from Georgia, who died recently, was likely exposed to this chemical. He died with Parkinson's disease and kidney cancer, had history of cancer, and he was likely exposed to this chemical when he was in the Georgia Air National Guard. These sites are throughout the United States. We think in Rochester, New York alone, there are over 100 TCE contaminated sites in a mid-sized city in the United States, and there are over thousands of these sites throughout the United States.
I think in your book you mentioned in Victor, New York, there was a site.
Yeah, so 10 minutes from where I live is this small suburban community that was using fresh water from Modoc Springs to give water to its community. And the Department of Environmental Conservation went around testing these fresh water supplies. And surprisingly to them, they found it contaminated with this chemical. It turned out that near a gravel pit, somebody had inappropriately disposed of TCE, apparently at this gravel pit, and had gotten into the freshwater drinking supply. So people in that community are drinking water contaminated with a cancer-causing chemical in suburban Rochester, New York. In addition, because it gets into the groundwater, there were homes sitting on top of this plume, underground river, of trichloroethylene, threatening the indoor air that they were breathing because it can evaporate like radon. Many people, millions of Americans, have had their homes tested for radon, and you put a radon remediation system in and you're fine. We could be doing the same thing for trichloroethylene, preventing hundreds, thousands, if not millions of Americans from being exposed to a cancer-causing chemical, a chemical that's likely a major factor in Parkinson's disease, prevent kids from getting leukemia. Every time I see a kid with cancer, I get pissed off because I wonder if that too is preventable. All this is achievable. All we need to do is take collective societal action to changing the laws that we have in our communities and to holding wrongdoers accountable for their actions.
That's why I think it's important that we went into detail on these different types of chemicals. Now I want to, and we're going to give solutions when we get closer to the end, but I want to talk about another cause, head injuries. Muhammad Ali at the NFL. If you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so it turns out repetitive head injury, not surprisingly, is not good for brain health. It's been associated with Parkinson's disease, it's been associated with ALS, it's been associated with chronic traumatic encephalopathy, CTE, it's associated with dementia. And it turns out that especially repeated head injury can increase your risk of developing Parkinson's disease, and was likely a contributing factor to the Parkinson's that the great Muhammad Ali experienced. And again, for many cases, this is preventable. We can take very reasonable actions, wearing seatbelts, airbags. I bike to work today and I wear a helmet. If you ski, you should consider wearing a helmet. If you have children who are doing youth sports, you should consider avoiding tackle football. If your daughter plays soccer, you should consider whether heading is advisable. The women who won the Women's World Cup in 1998, I believe, are revisiting their desire to have been heading the soccer ball so many times, because many of them are developing adverse brain consequences that are likely tied to repetitive head injury. A study in JAMA looked at 203, maybe 196 NFL football players, somewhere around 200 NFL football players. All but one of them had, when they looked at their brains under the microscope, had evidence of chronic traumatic encephalopathy. They even found it in, I think, 3 of 18 high school football players. We should be thinking about the recreational activities that we have, and are there ways to make these recreational activities safer. And it's clear that sports has a huge benefit to the development of humans, girls and boys. And we should be thinking, what are ways that we can promote sports, but do so in a way that's not going to have long-term adverse health consequences for individuals.
I mean, the NFL admits that a third of their players are going to get cognitive problems before the general public. That's something that they actually admit to.
So if that's an admit to, you should wonder what they might not admit to.
Right. I'm sure. I mean, just if you could tell a little bit about what CTE is for the audience.
Yes. So CTE is chronic traumatic encephalopathy. Recently came to the forefront by, I think, a pathologist who did work looking at the brains of football players, and found them to have significant pathology, significant atrophy, shrinkage of the brain, significant, especially in the parts of the brain responsible for memory, and parts of the brain responsible for the frontal lobes that are often controlling impulsive behavior. And so we've seen, story after story in the front pages of newspapers about NFL football players having evidence of chronic traumatic encephalopathy, NFL players committing suicide, Junior Seau by famously shooting himself in the chest, so that presumably his brain could be examined by researchers, see if some of the torments that he was suffering in life were the sequelae, the consequences of the football playing and repetitive head injury that he was experiencing while being one of the greatest football players of his generation.
Before we go into things that people could do to maybe prevent this, I'll talk about prognosis. 40% of these people wind up in a nursing home. Over 35 million people have to be cared for by another adult. And this is a big burden on people. And once they're in the nursing home, in your book, you talk about many of them don't get to see a neurologist. I think 2/3 don't see a neurologist, and 90% don't get PT or see a mental health specialist. Because if you could talk about what happens when these people wind up in a nursing home.
Yeah, so Dr. Gelb does his homework like nobody's else. So you should be listening to the work that Dr. Gelb does, because he's spending a lot of time doing research and communicating things that are really generally complex in a very easy to understand format, which is a gift to all of us. So long term, we said for the first 5 to 10 years, people with Parkinson's can function at a really high level. Still be actively engaged in the profession, still work, live independent and highly functioning lives. But after 5 to 10 years, Parkinson's takes its toll, and 7% of nursing home residents in the United States have Parkinson's disease, and that's probably an underestimate. You mentioned, I think, 1/4 of Medicare, 20% of Medicare beneficiaries are with Parkinson's disease reside in a nursing home. Some people develop Parkinson's disease after they go into the nursing home or never diagnosed with a very treatable condition. So it's a really suboptimal way for people to receive care, and people who are receiving better care before they went in the nursing home, once they go to the nursing home, it's hard to get care. If you think about it, it's kind of, we're both clinicians. It's kind of odd that we ask sick patients to see generally healthy clinicians on our terms. We, the healthy clinicians, should be seeing the sick patients on their terms. We should be bringing care to patients, not patients to care. But this is a huge issue, not just for the 1.2 million people with Parkinson's in the United States. It's a huge issue for caregivers, as you alluded to. There's about 40 million caregivers in the United States. 40 million Americans care for another adult in the United States. And the number one reason for caring for another adult are brain diseases. So Alzheimer's disease, Parkinson's disease, ALS, multiple sclerosis. And many of these diseases have environmental causes that are preventable. And these not extract an enormous human toll on the people with the disease and on caregivers. We know caregivers are at increased risk of adverse health consequences, of increased risk of depression, of increased risk of premature death. So when someone gets diagnosed with Parkinson's disease, it's not just affecting them, it's affecting their caregivers, it's affecting their family and their friends, and extracting human costs. And we're paying for it. So Medicare pays $25 billion, $25,000 per person with Parkinson's disease in incremental healthcare costs for someone with Parkinson's disease. By contrast, the NIH spends 1% of that much on doing research related to Parkinson's disease. So Medicare, you and me, we're paying taxes into a program that spends $25 billion caring for people with the disease, whereas NIH is spending 1% that much, 1 cent for every dollar that Medicare spends on research aimed at better understanding Parkinson's disease. This is untenable. And if these causes are preventable, and if they are tied to the toxicants, who should be paying the cost? Why are taxpayers subsidizing the cost of chemical companies? Why are taxpayers subsidizing the cost of chemical companies? If chemical companies want to sell their products, let them pay for the costs and the consequences of their products. If we let chemical companies pay for the costs and consequences of their products, we'll see a lot less use of these chemicals.
I mean, it's crazy. I mean, there's something called Parkinson's Net in Netherlands to try to do a better job in helping these people. Is that something that's going to spread to the United States? If you could mention that.
Yeah, so the reason I was 2 minutes late for Dr. Gelb's podcast, I was talking to the creator of Parkinson Net, my colleague and co-author of the book, Dr. Bas Bloem, who came up with this crazy idea in the Netherlands. He said, most people in the Netherlands with Parkinson's aren't getting optimal care. They're not getting the physical therapy they need. They're not getting the speech therapy that they need. They're not getting the occupational therapy that they need. They're not seeing the dietitians that they need. And many reasons they're not getting the care that they need is that people are inadequately trained. So he set out to train thousands of speech therapists, occupational therapists in the Netherlands. And now almost everyone in the Netherlands with Parkinson's disease gets expert care through a program called Parkinson Net that he's created for the country of the Netherlands. It might be so good that mortality due to Parkinson's disease might be decreasing in the Netherlands. It's so good that hip fractures due to people with Parkinson's in the Netherlands might be decreasing. It might be so good that healthcare expenditures for people with Parkinson's in the Netherlands might be decreasing. And it's been so good that other countries like Norway and even a couple places in the United States have adopted his care model. I think it's the most effective care model ever created for Parkinson's disease. And I think it's just beginning we're just scratching the surface of what's possible in terms of improving care for people with already affected by the disease.
Let's hope it spreads to the United States and they start getting good results. Not surprising that only 1% is being spent to try to figure out to help people with Parkinson's disease, but we're spending all these millions of dollars. Just think how much the NIH was spending more than 1%, how much money they could save on the other end.
And it's our money.
And it's our
our
money.
money.
It's our money.
We're subsidizing the harmful effects of chemical companies.
Yeah, I mean, and you know,
And not to prevent malaria, but so that our putting greens are green.
yeah, I mean, well, there's a lot of money in these chemicals, and I'm sure there's money going to the politicians that when they try to get rid of these chemicals, you know, the politicians are fighting against it because the deep pockets are the chemical companies, just like with anything else. With more screen usage and indoor time, myopia, also known as nearsightedness, is increasing and getting worse in children. Now, certified eye doctors can prescribe MiSight One Day, the first and only FDA-approved soft contact lens to slow myopia progression in age-appropriate children. Visit CooperVision.com to find a Brilliant Futures certified eye doctor near you.